My name is Cy Williams and I represent the media organization High Canada Magazine. We have been providing cannabis information and education for over 8 years here in Canada. We have watched the trends and we have carefully reported on the rise, the implementation, and current incarnation of cannabis legalization in Canada. We hear from our readers constantly about dissatisfaction with low possession limits, no or little clemency for cannabis-related charges, the fact that we are discriminating against Canadian cannabis users by not allowing consumption spaces is absolutely shameful. We also need to bring back proper access to medical cannabis, as this is sorely lacking within the current framework. Okay, this is my take on the federal government's questionnaire. So here are some instructions for completing this questionnaire. Remember, each question is optional. And for open-ended questions, there is a 5,000 character limit, including spaces. And if you do not feel like answering a question, you may skip to the following question. If you would like to go back to a previous question, you may do so by clicking on the back arrow. If you do not complete the questionnaire in one sitting, or one sesh, or two sessions, you may return to continue where you left off by accessing the questionnaire once more using the same computer or device that you started on. Your responses should be saved to the last page that you clicked on. Okay, so pretty cool. So now, to prevent accidental loss of your work, it is still advised that you save your responses at regular intervals as you complete the questionnaire. So there are 6 parts to the questionnaire. Each section has questions at the end to record your feedback. All information is required for you to provide meaningful feedback, and that's available, those resources, in the stakeholder engagement paper called Taking Stock of Progress, Cannabis Legalization and Regulation in Canada. I'm going to come up with an acronym for that. So, to support the ability to report on feedback received, they kindly ask that you, the participator, provide some demographic information, and respondents' privacy will be maintained. Please note, for your input to be considered, you must click submit at the end of the questionnaire. The first question. Minimizing harms to protect Canadians. Question 1.1. What is your view of the current legislative and regulatory restrictions in place to safeguard public health? For me, no. I heartily approve of regulatory restrictions in place to safeguard public health, especially when it comes to minors. Cannabis should be treated pretty much exactly the same as the alcohol industry in my eyes when it comes to promotion and to regulatory standards, with all marketing geared towards adults and adult audiences. We've been doing it for generations. We just continue to do it. We need to recognize safe access to medical cannabis for patients. Okay, question 1.2. What controls, if any, would I like to see changed, and why? Well, I believe possession limits should be more reasonable. A kilogram of cannabis is more or less the equivalent to 3 or 4 60-ounce bottles of whiskey. So why is it illegal to carry more than a little cannabis at a time? We don't need this oversight, nor do we have the resources to become a nanny state. We need to recognize that cannabis users, cannabis consumers are responsible, but they also need safe consumption sites. Why are these consumers, these cannabis consumers and users, being punished and forced to consume at home and deprived of any real sense of community, such as that can be found at any local tavern or bar across Canada? Okay, so question 1.3. Are the current safeguards adequately restricting access and helping to protect the health of youth? The health of youth. Well, I think the age-gated shops are working great. More education is needed and always needed. But with continued work, we can keep alcohol and tobacco and cannabis away from kids and youth. Okay, question 1.4. Under the current framework, what presents the greatest risk to youth in accessing and consuming cannabis? Oh, that's a good question. Well, a small part would be youth getting access to parent supply, and then the rest, a larger portion is probably lack of education on brain development and cannabis use. In both cases, education is key. Okay, so the second set of questions all revolve around education and awareness to support informed choices. Okay, question 2.1. To what extent have the public education efforts delivered the appropriate messages and reached the appropriate audiences, including youth and young adults? Okay, well, only slightly from my perspective. With numerous media groups talking about legal cannabis culture in Canada and some PSA work being done, there needs to be more and even better access to information. We need to look at cannabis like we do the alcohol, gaming, or tobacco industries. We have had our probationary period the last couple years, and now it's time to have a proper free market, regulated and taxed. Now, with cannabis becoming a great industry to work in as a cultivator or a technician or a programmer or a retail specialist or a cannabis specialist or a fertilizer specialist, there's more interest in this type of employment among young people, young adults, than ever before. Colleges and universities are now offering fully cannabis-centric courses, licenses, diplomas, certifications, and even more. This, in my opinion, tempers the overall adult use as we're seeing more academic and employment opportunities arise out of cannabis culture than consumption culture. Question 2.2. What additional measures or area of focus could be considered to close the gap between the perception of risks and harms and scientific evidence? Okay. In my opinion, we could work closer with existing Canadian cannabis media groups and academic establishments to ensure constant education happening about perceived perception of risks and harms while showcasing scientific evidence at the same time. That'd be my recommendation. Question 3.1. Do adult Canadians have sufficient access to a quality-controlled supply of legal cannabis? Well, Canadians do not have adequate access to cannabis across Canada yet. The federal system in place has really hurt medical cannabis users and placed unobtainable cost onto the idea of medicating with recreational cannabis. Access for medical cannabis patients, users, is as essential as serving every Canadian community that has a bar or a liquor store with an option, and this is a healthier option that will not cause long-term harm like recent findings on alcohol are showing us. Okay, question 3.2. What alternative measures, if any, could the government consider to further strengthen and diversify the legal market? Well, some alternative measures would include relaxed promotional, celebrity endorsement, marketing, and packaging restrictions. And that would allow the legal market to compete fairly with the illicit market, who are not at all tempered by these restrictions or these things. And they operate more like the American cannabis companies, openly promoting brands. There's nothing wrong with a Willie Nelson Presents or a Jim Belushi Presents, nor is there anything wrong with a brand educating the public about its values or its product. We should allow this market to flourish and drive the illicit market out of existence when it comes to cannabis. And I'm surprised we haven't yet. Okay, 3.3. What alternative measures, if any, could the government consider to better meet the needs of racialized, underrepresented, or indigenous communities within the cannabis licensing program? It's a good question. Well, you start grandfathering in licenses, mentorship programs, infrastructure support for racialized, underrepresented, and indigenous communities. And that's just a start. That's really needed. Okay, question 3.4. To what extent have the current restrictions on home cultivation of 4 plants or less supported the safe and responsible production of cannabis? Okay, well, growing is hard. It takes years of effort, or a minimum a few seasons, to grow something that you would be proud, I mean talking proud, to consume. This lends to a very safe and responsible approach to growing your own at home. 4 is still a little bit nanny state for me. 10 to 12 would be more reasonable in my opinion. 4.1. What are your general impressions of legal retailers? I personally respect the independents so much, the mom and pops. I do have a hard time with big impersonal cannabis chains who are not really interested in community or their customers, but rather they're interested in shoveling as much cannabis out the door as possible. There are many good independent retailers out there across Canada that bridge the gap between plant and consumer every day. A lot of the bigger chains, they don't employ this, not at all. They don't have this practice at all. They appear almost always to be very profit over people. I don't like that. Question 4.2. What additional steps or measures should the government consider to combat the illegal cannabis market? Well, in my opinion, none or minimum. Direct those resources instead towards the fentanyl and opioid crisis that is absolutely devastating Canada. Those resources are so better spent there. Okay, 5.1, question 5.1. What are your current views on the current medical access program for cannabis? My good friend Ted Smith was talking about this. Medical cannabis in Canada has an infrastructure that predates legalization. We need to accommodate existing medical access patients and find a common ground to grow out medical cannabis in Canada as a proper Health Canada program. I'm surprised we haven't managed to get a hold on this. Question 5.2. Is a distinct medical access program necessary to provide individuals with reasonable access to cannabis for medical purposes? Or can access needs be met through the non-medical framework? They ask you to explain. In my opinion, it's very important and extremely necessary to work with pre-existing Canadian medical cannabis organizations, and distinct medical access is absolutely a necessary program which needs to be developed further and further and further. A non-medical framework would just not work. Just as medication should not be sold on a street corner, but instead it is administered and sold at a pharmacy, well, you can't expect medical patients to go to rec shops for their cannabis. 3. Are there any specific reforms that I would like to see recommended? Yes. While the original laws came into place very cautiously, I feel it is now time to release the tight grasp and accept that cannabis has made a significant contribution to taxed revenue for the federal government since legalization. It is now time to relax possession limit laws. It's time to allow and license consumption spaces with regulated HVAC and ventilation requirements, of course. It's time to ease back on all the packaging, marketing, and media restrictions currently in place in Canada. Okay, question 6, general comments. Question 6.1. What are your views on the impacts of legalization of cannabis on the environment, small businesses, and social and economic impacts on diverse groups of Canadians in accordance with the Government of Canada's commitment to implementing sex and gender-based analysis plus SGBA plus. Cannabis legalization has been so great for Canadians. You know, it has been. You know, from job creation to creating regional and local economic viability and opportunity, cannabis has produced a green rush that spans generations and spurs entrepreneurs across our great land on to greatness. For small business, it is an amazing opportunity, and these small craft companies need to be nourished and supported and encouraged. 6.2. Please provide additional comments you would like to share on the administration and operation of the Cannabis Act in Canada and its regulations that were not addressed in the previous sections. In particular, we are interested in hearing from you on additional impacts the Cannabis Act has had since its implementation, including trends you've observed and evidence sources that substantiate such trends. Please include additional sources of information or data that should be considered to support the legislative review. Whoa. Okay, please limit your response to 5,000 characters, including spaces.